Hello all, my name is Paul Searl, and this video is going to be a bit of an overview of Dad and I's collection of Rock Island and Heider tractors. This is something that I've been thinking about doing for a while now, but had not really wanted to tackle. But with our show in Geneseo, Illinois coming up in September of 2025, it's going to feature Lessor Knowns. And we're going to try and have a Rock Island rendezvous versus the Moline Plow Company reunion. Um, the show had a Moline Universal reunion in 2019 that was a really good show. I think we had 32 tractors there. We're hoping to replicate some of that success, and as the local Rock Island and Heider collector, I thought it would be kind of fun to renew that 150-year-old rivalry between the two companies and just see what we can get out there. So I'm making this video as a little bit to talk about and showcase some of our history. And I plan to do a series of videos then after this that will focus a little bit more on specific tractors. I don't know for sure that we have the largest collection. I don't know for sure that we have the most diverse collection. I don't know for sure that we have most working Heiders and Rock Islands, but we've certainly been trying. A little bit about our history. We have a farm just outside of the Quad Cities region, which includes Rock Island and Moline and Devonport and Bettendorf. And the family has been here for well over 100 years. Growing up, I listened to Dad on occasion say, I wish we wouldn't have scrapped the Heider. I wish we still had the Rock Island. Great Grandpa had started with a Heider, and he had then purchased a Rock Island. The Heider was scrapped, and the Rock Island was sold in the 70s since Dad and Grandpa didn't have the time, the money, or the way to get it home. Ever since then, there's been a lookout for that tractor, and now we have been actively searching for it. When Dad decided to retire from farming, the day after his auction was another auction in the southern part of Rock Island County, and on it was a Rock Island advertised. Dad said, I want to go see it sell. I haven't seen one sell in a long time. I said, let's go buy it. I've listened to 30 years of I wish they wouldn't have scrapped the Heider. I wish they wouldn't have sold the Rock Island. I don't want to listen to it for another 30 years. Let's go buy it. So we went to the auction. And Dad got a little bit of a hard time from some of the auction goers who had been at his sale the day before. But anyway, we walked out the door with a Rock Island tractor. We didn't know very much about it at the sale. A couple of locals did know a few things about it. Kind of suggested that, yeah, it was maybe a rarer model. But again, we didn't know anything about it. Got it home, started doing a little bit of research, found Smokestack. If you're not familiar with Smokestack, Smokestack's an old forum that's been around for quite some time and is still a very, very useful place for information. That's not Facebook. Months later, a Heider popped up for auction down at Mount Pleasant. The day of the sale, they talked about how this tractor had been found brand new in the box for shipping. The previous owner had gone to a hardware store closeout in Rock Island, and there was a shed that was collapsed in the back, and he asked if the shed went with it, and they said yes, so he ended up buying the whole thing. In this collapsed shed was this Heider that had never been unpacked from its shipping configuration. It had had substantial water damage, so he restored it, and it's probably got about 4 hours of runtime on it. So it hasn't seen a whole lot of use. It's also been a bear of a tractor for us to work with, but replacing the 100-year-old spark plugs did help. Next tractor after that was a G2 that we bought on an auction in Minnesota. Yeah, if we knew then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have bought it. But we bought it, and we ended up doing a full-scale restoration on it. The G2 is one of the two most common rock islands in the F. So ours, we decided, since we had the main portion of the PTO system, we would go ahead and actually make a working PTO. There's not a whole lot in the way of pictures or drawings of the PTO itself, but there are pictures of the hitch arrangement and drawings. So Dad was able to come up with the factory style hitch. We decided to get a Woods Brothers corn picker to go along with it. The Woods Brothers was the family corn picker, and we thought that it would make a good companion to the G2. The G2 is actually a little fast for the corn picker, especially in the condition the corn picker's in. So we have to be a little careful with it, but it does make for a pretty impressive display when we've got the corn picker on it. Possibly the rarest tractor in our collection came from the Jared Rubel collection. It is a 1936 H22. Now, the 1936 is unique. I have no records of any other 1936 Rock Island. Officially, they were out of production. Unofficially, they had enough to run a couple months, possibly. I know currently of 5 H22s. 26 engines were shipped according to Waukesha. We do have 2 of the H22s now. There are, as far as I know, 5. And of those, 2 of those have bad rear ends. They had too much power and not enough rear end. They were basically the same as a 2844 Par or a CS Huber. Records for the Rock Island Plow Company are very, very sparse. There's almost nothing for manufacturing history. There's almost nothing. There are some board records that are held in Minnesota at the Weyerhaeuser Archives, but most of the records have disappeared. And this was because Case bought out the company in '37, and sometime after that, possibly when Case and IH did their infamous merger, a lot of those records were purged. So most of the information that I have on production numbers and serial numbers comes from actual serial number tags, the parts books, and the Waukesha Engine Historical Society, which has been incredibly valuable to me in my research, because they actually assembled a list in the 70s for their anniversary of companies that had purchased a significant number of engines from them over the years. And Rock Island was actually one of them, and they went through their records and they had assembled a really nice list of all the engines that they could find records for that had been shipped to Rock Island Plow Company. So the Waukesha engines, I actually have a pretty good list of. I don't have a list of the Buddha engines. I don't have a list of the Leroy engines. Rutenberg, certainly no records of those. So a lot of what I know is based on solid information, but it's also upper limits. When I say 56 engines were shipped to Rock Island for the H5, that's the upper limit. I don't know for sure that they actually built 56 tractors. They may have built less than 56 tractors. Same with the H22s. We know they shipped 26 engines, and we don't know how many tractors they actually built. Records indicate that they ran production a little bit after they officially ceased production in '35. They ran production a couple weeks, maybe even a month and a half, 2 months of very limited production. we now have two of the H22s, again the 36. We have a 35-22. It is the only one that we have on full factory rubber with the round spoke French effect wheels. That came out of Minnesota, and it was actually a primary tillage tractor still into the 70s. So it has seen quite a bit of use, but after we got it and got it working, it's actually a pretty nice tractor. Another notable tractor that we have in our collection is the 27F. This is one of the first 250Fs built. It's missing its serial tag, so it's hard to exactly pin down when it was built in the production line, but it is fairly close to the Nebraska test number 100 tractor. So it's probably in the 100 to 150 serial number range, but there's really no way to prove that at this point. It has quite a few differences from the regular production Fs, including the fact that it had the short fenders. I call them short fender Fs. There's no official name for them. That was never an official designation, but that's a term that I use to differentiate them out because that is the immediately visible feature on them. The early Fs and early Gs were painted with the green, then switched over to the gray, and that's a lingering question of just where the gray and the green overlapped. I have found tractors that were 28 serial numbers that still appeared to have been painted green, but all the advertising, even in 27, was for gray. So, lingering questions. I think right now I'm up to 8 short fender Fs known to exist out of that original 250. Another notable tractor in our collection, this is actually one of my favorites. I have quite a few favorites, but this one is one that I really enjoy talking about. Model G Rock Island, and it was built using a Heider engine. But this was a 1927 and 1928 tractor, and virtually all of them that I have found, I've got rumors of one that still has a serial number tag on the engine, but I don't have photos of that serial number tag on the engine. All the other ones that I've been able to look at and confirm are missing the engine serial number tag. And the reason for that, I think, is because Rock Island didn't want anyone to know that their brand new 1927, 1928 tractor had a 1920 engine in it. Rock Island had bought Waukesha's some stock of Model M engines that were the headless engines, and they were still using them up. So I think it was deliberate. I think I have 14 of them known, and about half of them are in very rough condition. Ours isn't super pretty. It's pretty original, but it does run. If you've been to Geneseo or you've been to a show that we have been at, there's a pretty good chance that we also had our motor cultivator there. The Heider motor cultivators were split into 3 models, the M, M1, and M2. The M and the M1 were both 2-row cultivators. The M2 was a 1-row cultivator. We actually bought our M1 from the John Heider collection when he had his dispersal sale. And it was kind of a funny story because a friend of ours that was also local in Rock Island, he was bidding against us, and they were going to sell the cultivator gangs separately. And he asked if the cultivator gangs went with it, and they said yes, they did. So we bid on it. We won. Kenny was disappointed but didn't get it. A few lots later, they went to sell the cultivator gangs. Kenny walks up to the auctioneer window, taps on it with his cane, and says, "You already sold the cultivator gangs. I bid on that with the cultivator gangs, so they are not for sale." So we got the cultivator gangs to go with it. Kenny was a good friend. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. Him and Dick Bockwalt were both very influential when I was getting started on this, and I learned quite a bit from their collections and from their history and knowledge that they had gained over the years. So a lot of what I have built and learned has been built on the collections and history of those two gentlemen. So a lot of respect for them. The motor cultivators are kind of fun. We bought our one-row motor cultivator out east, and we paid more for it than we ever dreamed that we were going to pay for a tractor. But looking back over the 10 plus years that we've owned it now, it turned out it was actually money well spent, because that tractor is a lot of fun to play around with. It always gets a lot of attention at the shows. The two-row is an absolute pain to haul. It's over 108 inches wide. It's just not fun, and we do have the motor running, but we're still working on fixing some drive issues with it. To actually cultivate with it, I swear you gotta be an octopus. The one row is bad, but you literally need 8 arms to run the two row fully and effectively. It wasn't a super practical design compared to the later one row. I mentioned that we've got the 1220. I had found during my research, listening from a catalog from Waterloo Manufacturing, that talked about the Heider DU. And the Heider DU is a little bit different from the Heider D. The DU is actually built on the C chassis and had a later Ricardo L head Waukesha DU engine in it. And I found a photo on Smokestack that made me think that it was potentially a DU tractor that still existed. And I was able to track down the owner of it, Jim Matson, in Idaho, and started talking with him. He had bought it up at Reynolds, Alberta, when they did a bit of a distribution sale, get rid of some of the excess that they had up at Reynolds, Alberta. And he had bought that tractor, even though he thought it had the wrong engine in it, because his family Heider had the engine exhaust on the boat pulley side, and he got in trouble because he'd stand in the exhaust when they were chopping silage because he was trying to keep warm, and his dad would yell at him because he was standing next to the belt. He bought the tractor and he restored it, and he always thought it had the wrong engine in it, but it was such a well done conversion that he never had any interest in messing with it. And honestly, finding a Waukesha M engine is pretty tough to begin with. He was really surprised when I contacted him and started asking him questions about his Heider, and finally told him that he actually had a Heider DU. They shipped 36 engines to Rock Island to build the Heider DUs. Again, no idea how many were actually built, but 36 engines were shipped. About a year later, he contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in it. He said, I just turned 90. I'm not going to be able to do this any longer. You're the only person that probably knows what this tractor is. Would you be interested in it? So we made an agreement, and the truck that we hired to pick it up as a backhaul got there actually before the check did, but that didn't bother him any. He loaded it on the truck, and we ended up with the Heider DU. I know of one other fairly complete and running tractor over in Spain. The other two DUs that I know of, one is a chassis and missing almost all of the parts. The other one is, I think, mostly there, but it's missing the flywheel and some other parts in one of the Canadian museums. We've got a Heider D that we restored from the ground up. The engine wasn't stuck, and that was about the best thing that could be said for it. We ended up finding a plow that we put on it. We've been having trouble with the fact that the valve ports, we haven't found a good way of not shooting flame out around those valve ports. We keep experimenting with some different stuff. Somebody has a lead on Waukesha R valve port crush rings. Be very, very grateful for them. A couple of years ago, got the opportunity to buy another tractor that I'd known about pretty much since we started collecting. This was from a collector over in Indiana, Jerry Kirsch. Many of you older collectors probably do know who he is. Jerry was quite the character, very interesting fellow. He told me one time that he'd probably restored half the hiders that were out there. Considering the number that I have found, he was probably stretching things a little bit, but he certainly had his hands in a lot of different hiders. But one that he had kept for his collection was a brass tractor tag hider that was really kind of unique in a lot of ways. The serial tag called it a 15 instead of a 20. He called it a 1527, but when you looked at the brass tag, it simply said Carroll, Iowa. No mention of Rock Island. When he started dispersing his collection, he contacted me and asked if we'd be interested in it. I said yes. He made us an offer. We made him a counter offer. He didn't accept. About 2 or 3 years later, he contacted us and said, "Hey, your offer's still standing on this hider." We said, "Sure." So we went out, and the first thing I did was walk over and start to give it a crank, and the crank don't move. And Jerry immediately, "No, no, no, it's not stuck. It's not stuck." He grabbed a come along and looped it over the crank and started to crank it around. And sure enough, it wasn't stuck. It's just very, very tight. So we ended up buying it. Got it home. Put some oil in the cylinders, starting to get lubed up, and Dad put the pry bar on the flywheel. And about a week later, it moved and moved just fine. But we also found out that it had a mouse nest in it. So we ended up taking it apart anyway to get the mouse nest out and just make sure things were in good condition. Digging into it, there's a lot more to this tractor than meets the eye, because this was actually one of the original Heider Cs that were built in Carroll, Iowa, before it was sold off to Rock Island Plow Company. These tractors, they were initially marketed as 8 to 10 good horses, and then went through a few power rating changes. And then when Rock Island took over the line, somewhere around serial number 1000, they retroactively in the parts books, they're referred to as 1020s. Right now I have two 815 Carroll Hiders and two 1020 Rock Island Hiders on my list, being to show a 1020 versus a 1220, confirmed just from pictures. The Waukesha M engine that's on it, you'd almost think was a completely different model of engine from the Waukesha M that's in our 1917 Hyder C1220. So lots of interesting things with that tractor. We do have a couple of Fs sitting out in another shed. And those, well, one probably should be restored someday. I don't know if we'll ever get to it. It's a 27 or 28 production F that I actually would like to restore. The other one's a later model F, and it's got a bad manifold, so it's slowly being turned into a parts tractor. It would be a restoration candidate, but manifolds are almost impossible to find. We did restore an FA after it is on cutoffs. The Rock Island Plow Company had quite a few short lines with very little documentation. Two of the more elusive are the H3 and H4. They were meant as the successors to the G2 and had a slightly upgraded CSR engine that replaced the CS4 engine, and they had an F rear end. The radiator on the H3 was actually an F radiator with an F gas tank, and then for the H4, they went ahead and went back to the G2 radiator and gas tank. We have an H3 that is currently sitting around waiting for restoration. We thought it would look like a pretty good tractor when we bought it until we tore into the engine and found that it had a bit more problems than we liked. So that's been steadily shifting around on the back burner. And we do have an H4. The H4 actually was the one that we took to a lot of shows when we kind of got started, because the H5 and the F and the G2 were all under restoration at the time. So the H4 kind of was our mainstay tractor for a few years, and then kind of got put in the shed, and it hasn't really been out that much lately. They shipped 100 engines. There are no H3s above 50 that I know of, and there are no H4s below 50 that I know of. So, probably fair to say 50-50. There's about 12 known, but at least a third in each category are not much more than parts tractors. Most of the collection at this point, with one exception, that's the number one. You'll be forgiven if you don't know what the number one is. The number one was Rock Island's answer to the Farmall that they started prototyping around in 1933 or 34. And they built 7, 4 of them with Waukesha XAH engines, 3 with something else. They were going to have the option of steel or rubber. If you got them on rubber, they were going to be a 4-speed transmission. They put out some really, really nice brochures for them, the best Rock Island ever did, and they never put them into production. The last known one is in our shed. It needs massive restoration. We do have an engine for it that should work. The rear end is there, but it's going to need massive amounts of work, but it's missing the entire front end. That's going to be an adventure and a half to get that rebuilt and functional. We peck away at it now and then. That's another one of those projects that's been put towards the back, simply because it is such a massive undertaking. We'll have to take a look and see what's going to be on the next round of projects going forward. So anyway, that's kind of a overview of our collection. I hope to see you out at Geneseo second weekend after Labor Day. It's a working farm show. We'll have stuff out in the field, plowing, picking, all the usual, blacksmithing, threshing, shelling, sawmill. It's a really nice show. I've heard people refer to it as half-century light, which I think is a compliment. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of Dad and I's collection, and maybe I'll see you at a show sometime. If you need to get a hold of me, you can leave a message here on YouTube or catch me on Facebook or Smokestack. I also have the RockIslandPlowCO.com website. It doesn't work on Google for the mobile, but you can still get into it by directly typing in the URL.